Scottish should get them.
Sorry. Just give me a minute, Ms McNeill. Can we have Pauline McNeill's microphone, please? Okay, I call Pauline McNeill. Bear with me, Ms McNeill. Ms McNeill.
Apparently it's a coup. Third time lucky. To ask the Scottish Government whether it plans to issue guidance to schools encouraging them to prohibit the use of mobile phones by pupils.
Cabinet Secretary Jenny Gilruth.
As confirmed in my statement to Parliament on the 12th of December 2023, the Scottish Government will shortly publish updated guidance for schools regarding the use of mobile phones by pupils. As a starting point for this guidance, head teachers should be empowered to take any action they deem necessary, including banning mobile phone use, should they see fit. Indeed, many head teachers have already chosen to do so within their school communities.
Pauline McNeill.
In secondary schools, the behaviour most commonly reported by staff as having the greatest negative impact is pupils using mobile phones when they shouldn't be. People commonly assume that smartphones are only a problem in secondary schools, but one of my constituents has raised concern about his child's primary school, and the school has had problems with inappropriate content being circulated on WhatsApp groups, bullying via smartphones. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell me if the Scottish Government is looking into the extent of cyberbullying taking place in Scottish schools and what policies are being considered to meet this problem?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for her question, and she's right to highlight the issues in relation to primary school, and that was a key finding from the BISA research that the Government published in November. Of course, the Government has a number of policies in regards to anti-bullying, which we take extraordinarily seriously, and I think it's worthwhile putting on the record that in the coming weeks, following the publication of the mobile phone guidance, we will publish an updated national action plan in relation to some of the challenges we are seeing in our schools at the current time on behaviour, and I think through that work we would seek to ensure that any of our anti-bullying policies are updated as a result. But it's worthwhile recording some of the real challenge here in relation to mobile technology, which I would also observe is not just an issue in relation to our schools, it's an issue in relation to our discourse in the Parliament.
Question number 7, Finlay Carson.
To ask the Scottish Government what percentage of Historic Environment Scotland properties remain partially closed subject to safety checks.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The work on the properties in care is ongoing and consequently the position is constantly changing. So in order to provide the member with the most up-to-date figure on sites that remain partially closed, I've asked Historic Environment Scotland to write to the member directly with a full response.
Finlay Carson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. Last week I was told that 90% of Historic Environment Scotland sites had reopened fully or had partial access. And we're all aware of sites in our constituencies, and of the 30 in Dumfries and Galloway, 5 currently have no visitor access, which has a significant effect on the tourism economy. According to a whistleblower with NHS, they dispute the 90% figure, claiming that more than 200 sites still have serious high-level masonry issues that would pose a real threat to the public. And they express concerns on the long-term future of these buildings. They insist that they're not even halfway through. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to provide evidence of where the 90% figure came from and for a reassurance around public safety?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I thank Finlay Carson for his follow-up question. I hear the concern that he raises. As I mentioned in my previous answer, Historic Environment Scotland will be writing to him directly, and should he have any further issues or concerns, I've given him an assurance that I would welcome a follow-up discussion about that answer. We're all committed to safety at historic sites and their speediest reopening, and having accurate information serves all of us in that purpose.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, parents in Glasgow were protesting cuts to teacher numbers. They say they're fighting for their kids' education because these cuts will make it, in their words, impossible for schools to support pupils properly. In Glasgow, over 100 teachers have already gone, and it's proposed that number will rise to 450. Across Scotland, teacher numbers have declined for 2 years running. And a new Scottish Government report, published this week, suggests that the SNP may abandon their manifesto pledge to increase teacher numbers by 3,500. The First Minister made that promise when he was Education Secretary. So will he be honest with pupils, parents and teachers today? Is he going to stick to his promise to increase teacher numbers by 3,500 in this Parliament?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the commitments that have been given by the Government in relation to teacher numbers are commitments that have been given in good faith to strengthen the provision of education in Scotland. And I want the Government to work with our local authority partners to deliver on those commitments. But of course, the approach that we take is hugely dependent on the resources that we have available. The Government has obviously taken steps to expand the resources that we've got available to us. If the Government had not taken the tax decisions, for example, it had taken, we would be over £1 billion worse off in relation to the funding that we have available. But I have to answer directly Mr Ross's question about the challenges we face in the public finances due to the pressures of inflation and the persistence of austerity that is framing public expenditure from the United Kingdom Government. But I assure Mr Ross and parents, most importantly in the City of Glasgow and around the country, of the Government's commitment to sustained investment in education and to maximise the investment we can make available.
Douglas Ross.
Of course, that wasn't my question. The question was very specific on a specific pledge, not made by any other SNP MSP, but made by the First Minister. He was the Education Secretary who went to the country and told people, vote for the SNP, trust me, and we will increase teacher numbers by 3,500 in this Parliament. And if, I'm not convinced, I don't think any parent, pupil or teacher will be convinced with that answer from John Swinney today. We were supposed to have a different style of politics, but it sounds like the excuses are the same as we've had before. And sadly, John Swinney's record in education is one of broken promises. He introduced a flagship education bill that could have improved standards, then he abandoned it. He promised a free laptop to every child. That never happened. 3 years ago, the SNP said that Education Scotland would be reformed. Nothing happened. The government he served in promised the SQA would be replaced. It's still there. So on teacher numbers, can he just give a straight yes or no answer? Is he going to stick to his own pledge to increase teacher numbers across Scotland by 3,500 in this Parliament, or will it be more of the same broken promises from John Swinney and the SNP?
First Minister.
On the question of education delivery, let me just put a few things on the record of what this Government has achieved. When we came to office in 2007, 63% of children and young people were being educated in good or satisfactory buildings. That figure today is 93%. 93%. It's a transformation of the educational estate in Scotland. We have allocated £145 million to support the recruitment of teachers in partnership with local government. So these are some of the things that we have delivered. The reform programme in Education Scotland and in the Scottish Qualifications Authority is being implemented. But obviously these are issues that I've just come back into office, so I'll be looking very carefully at the progress that's been made in this respect, because I've not been on this front bench for 12 months or so I'll be getting much closer to all of that. But on the question of the commitment to 3,500 teachers, I want to be absolutely clear with people in Scotland today. We face very significant financial pressures in Scotland in our public finances. So the perspective on the public finances has deteriorated because of the effect of austerity, because of the cuts that have been made in public expenditure, and also because of the very significant inflation that we have had to wrestle with, which has resulted in teachers, for example, becoming the best paid teachers in the United Kingdom as a consequence of our decisions. So the Government will take forward its programme within the resources that are available to us, but I have to make clear to people, to be straight with the public, which I will be, that public finances are under enormous pressure, and we will set out our commitments as we take our budget decisions.
Douglas Ross.
I'd quite like John Swinney to be clear and straight with this Parliament and just answer a question. I'll ask it for a third time and hopefully get a response. John Swinney, as Education Secretary, made a pledge to voters across Scotland that vote for him and vote for the SNP, they would increase teacher numbers across Scotland by 3,500 over the course of this Parliament. Is that going to happen? Yes or no? A clear and straight answer from John Swinney is what's needed, because he has been Education Secretary in a previous government. From 2016 to 2021, he was Education Secretary of Scotland. And during that time, education was supposed to be the SNP's top priority. They wanted to be judged on education. But when he was in charge, Scotland's schools and the results therein fell to record lows in the OECD's PISA rankings. These tests measure performance in maths, reading and science, and on all three, Scotland's scores declined substantially when John Swinney was Education Secretary. So why did Scotland plummet down international school league tables on his watch? And for the third time, and hopefully getting an answer, will he say to the people of Scotland, is he going to keep his promise to increase teacher numbers by 3,500?
First Minister.
I've nothing really to add to what I've said to Douglas Ross about the financial position that we face, because the financial position is acutely challenging and difficult, and it's different to the position that we faced in 2021 and back in 2016. So, because of there has been a rampant increase in inflation on the watch of the Conservative government.
Let's hear the First Minister.
And if inflation rises, and this is
Mr. Hoy.
This is elementary arithmetic, Mr. Hoy, and we're going to have to go through some elementary arithmetic to help you out here with the understanding the answer. If inflation rises by 10%, the value of money available to spend reduces. So I want to make sure we've got a well-supported and substantial teaching profession, but I have to live in the real world of the public finances available to me, despite the fact that the Conservatives oppose every single tax change we have made to boost the public expenditure that's available in Scotland. So the Government will take these decisions in the proper course of its budgetary process. But can I just say to Mr Ross, when I was Education Secretary, teacher numbers rose. They were higher. They rose during my term in office as Education Secretary. And one of the things I'm most pleased about, and I can't claim all the credit for this because my successors have delivered this since 2021, record positive destinations are being achieved by young people in Scotland, and that's a tribute to the strength of the education system in Scotland.
Douglas Ross.
John Swinney wants to give credit to his successors as Education Secretary. We have 250 fewer teachers in Scotland in just the last 2 years. He's not being straight with the public about whether he agrees or not with his own promise to increase them by 3,500 in this Parliament, but we know already they're going down. Teacher numbers across Scotland are falling under an SNP government. And I'm sorry, John Swinney is reaching out across parties to seek consensus and working together. Some of that has to come from him. He's got to be honest. He's got to give a straight answer. And I'm going to ask for the 4th time today, will he, as First Minister, commit to the promise he made to the people of Scotland to increase teacher numbers by 3,500? It is not difficult to say yes or no. Explain why it's no, but tell people, be honest and say he's not going to do it. Because as Education Secretary, John Swinney went from one failure to another. His implementation of the SNP's Curriculum for Excellence was a mess. And he's smiling at that. It was a mess, Mr Swinney. He was at the centre of multiple SQA fiascos. Again, it's not something to laugh about. He broke promises to improve the exam system. He was supposed to close the attainment gap entirely, but he failed. He damaged Scotland's international reputation for education. For 16 years, John Swinney has been at the heart of a government that has let down pupils, parents and teachers. Now he's the head of that government. What's going to change?
First Minister.
Well, certainly what's not going to change is the script that we get from Douglas Ross every single... So let's just talk about some of the achievements that were made in education today on the most recent data. Record levels of literacy and numeracy attainment at primary school and improvements in secondary were recorded in the Curriculum for Excellence data on the 12th of December. There is a record low attainment gap between the proportion of pupils from the most and the least deprived areas achieving the expected levels in literacy and reductions at secondary level. Again, the Curriculum for Excellence level data on the 12th of December. In the summer of 2023, we had the highest ever number of passes at National 5, a tremendous achievement by the children and young people of Scotland, and a record number of vocational and technical qualifications that were achieved. In 2023, higher and advanced higher pass rates were higher than those achieved in 2019. So I am going to be straight with the public of Scotland. I'm going to tell them it the way it is. So I'm going to be clear that we're under enormous financial pressure. And my government is going to have to come to Parliament with information about the challenges we face in the public finances, and we will be doing that in due course. I've only been the First Minister for 48 hours, not even 48 hours, but we'll be coming to Parliament to be straight about the challenges that we face. But I'll also be straight with the people of Scotland about the successes that this government has delivered and which we're very proud of.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, the last 2 weeks have been all about managing the SNP and have had nothing to do with running our country or delivering for Scotland. But politics isn't a game. Decisions made by government have consequences, and the effects of these decisions over the last 17 years are playing out in communities across the country. The decisions John Swinney made as Finance Secretary and Education Secretary are being felt by pupils, parents and teachers. Since 2007, Scotland's education standards have declined and teacher numbers have fallen. The government claims they are fully funding councils, but their own SNP-led council in Glasgow has made a decision to cut 172 teachers this year and 450 teachers over the next 3 years. So a direct and simple question: will he step in, save these teachers' jobs and protect young people's education?
First Minister.
The first point I want to make is that the events of the last 2 weeks have been, frankly, traumatic for my party. I accept that. And they have had everything to do with running the country, because I'm now here to lead this government and to lead it with the firmness of direction it needs to address the problems facing the country and to achieve our objectives. That's what I'm here to do. Now, on the question of attainment, I've gone through with Mr Ross some of the strengths that exist in Scottish education today, and we will continue to improve that performance and to support the education system to do so. And we will obviously work collaboratively with local government on that agenda, because local government, local authorities, the City of Glasgow Council are responsible for the delivery of education in our communities. I'll be meeting with the leadership of the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities on Friday, immediately after the first meeting of the Cabinet, because I put the greatest importance on working in partnership with our local authorities. And one of the most critical points about working in partnership with local authorities is that we work collaboratively. I would have members of Parliament in here complaining all the time if I instructed local authorities what to do, and I won't be doing that.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, John Swinney needs to confront the challenges he created over the last 17 years in local government and education. Now, I was with the Glasgow City Parents Group and many of the teachers affected yesterday. This cut in Glasgow will hit people in the most deprived communities the hardest. The very same working class kids whose grades John Swinney, as Education Secretary, attempted to downgrade shamefully during the COVID exams scandal. And of the teachers I met, one told me they had retrained 2 years ago and was now going to lose her job. Another hasn't been able to get a permanent contract since he qualified. And a third who said this doesn't feel like the thanks and reward the government promised them coming out of the pandemic. John Swinney bears responsibility for the broken finances in our councils and the decimation of our education system. So don't give us the warm words. Don't try and explain away the record. Tell the pupils, their parents and their teachers, what are you going to do to protect their education?
First Minister.
It's very important that we have an open discussion about the choices that face public authorities and public bodies. And one of the issues that's faced Glasgow City Council, which has cost the City Council a formidable amount of money, has been the resolution of the equal pay disgrace that was presided over by the Labour Party when they ran the Glasgow City Council. Women in our society, for many, many years, persistently were let down. The Labour Party, in running Glasgow City Council, went to the courts to challenge the legitimate claims of low-paid women in the city of Glasgow. It's something the Labour Party should be utterly ashamed of. So I understand the challenges that face Glasgow City Council. That's why I'll engage constructively with Glasgow City Council and with the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities when I meet the Convention on Friday.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, clearly no answer for parents, pupils and teachers in Glasgow, but just obfuscation from this First Minister. Now let's look at John Swinney's record. As Finance Secretary, he broke local finances and slashed the budget for local services. As Education Secretary, he abandoned teachers, standards declined, the attainment gap widened, Scotland fell in the international league tables, and shamefully he downgraded the results of working class children during the pandemic. And now as First Minister, he is trapped by the past, defending his own record while Scotland's children pay the price. Scotland once had an education system that was the envy of the world, and I believe we can get there again. But continuity won't cut it. To give our young people the education and opportunities they deserve, and to unlock the huge potential of our nation, Scotland needs fresh leadership, new ideas and change. So after being at the heart of every single SNP failure for the past 17 years, why does John Swinney think Scotland should accept more of the same?
First Minister.
I've got good news for Anna Sarwar. The fresh leadership has just arrived.
Members.
And
let's hear the First Minister.
And I'm right here to deliver it. And you see, the thing, well, they're laughing because they're delighted I'm here to do it. That's why they're laughing. They're over the moon that I'm here. They sent me here. They were all behind it. So So, the people did send me here, Mr Sarwar. The people have sent me here on every election that I have had my name on the ballot paper. My constituents have sent me here. And in 2007, the people sent us into government. In 2011, they sent us into government. In 2016, they sent us into government. In 2021, they sent us into government. And in 2026, under my leadership, they'll send us back into government as well. And in his absence of cheerfulness escapade today, can I just point out to Mr Sarwar that I think Scotland's got a very, very good education system, and we'll continue to improve it in the years to come.
Yeah. Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
The Scottish Greens have been clear that we acknowledge the SNP's right to form a minority government, but we've been equally clear that the First Minister must quickly give a signal of the direction his government will take. Yesterday, that signal came pretty clearly. Progressive ministers sacked, and the second most powerful job in government given to someone who has opposed LGBT people's legal equality, who's expressed judgmental attitudes against abortion, and who's even expressed the view that people who have families without being married are doing something wrong. Is this the Scottish Government's vision for the future of Scotland, taking us back to the repressive values of the 1950s?
First Minister.
No, it's not, and it's not the direction of the Scottish Government. The Government will be led from the moderate left-of-centre position that I have always occupied, and which is the policy position of my party, and which is supported by all of our members. I set out on last Thursday, a week ago today, when I announced my candidacy for the leadership of my party, that I wanted to build on the work of the SNP government to create a modern, diverse, dynamic Scotland that will ensure opportunity for all of our citizens. And on Tuesday, I made it clear to the people of Scotland in my closing words in my speech of acceptance that I offer myself to be the First Minister for everyone in Scotland, and that is precisely what I will do.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm not yet sure that the First Minister acknowledges or understands just how worried many LGBT people and others are in Scotland at the moment. But this is not only about equality and human rights that are at stake here, because the new Deputy First Minister has also explicitly criticised the role of fairer progressive taxation. Making sure that people on high incomes pay their fair share is the only way that the Scottish Government has been able to afford investment in climate and nature, cheaper public transport or the Scottish Child Payment. Without fairer tax policies, which the Greens repeatedly had to push the SNP into supporting, these things simply couldn't have happened. Now, next year, whether it's the Tories or the Labour Party, we know that the UK Government will continue with austerity, imposing deeper cuts than ever on Scotland. So does the First Minister accept that continuing on the path toward progressive taxation will be more important than ever? Will that progress continue, or will the First Minister give in to the right wing of his party?
First Minister.
Can I just say that, as a matter of history and record, that the Deputy First Minister was responsible for introducing progressive taxes in Scotland. Kate Forbes took those budget decisions, sought the agreement of the Cabinet, and they were put to Parliament. And I welcome the fact that our colleagues in the Green Party supported the measures that the Government brought forward. So I think it's pretty clear that Kate Forbes has embraced delivered progressive taxation. Kate Forbes has also, by delivering the approach to progressive taxation, delivered measures such as the Scottish Child Payment, which is taking 100,000 children out of poverty today. That, to me, is something that is to be warmly welcomed across our country, which supports the mission of my government to eradicate child poverty. Now, I take very seriously the challenge that Mr Harvey puts to me, because I want people to be reassured in this country by my leadership. And when I say that I want to be the First Minister for everyone in Scotland, I deeply mean that. I want to lead a modern, dynamic and diverse Scotland, a place for everybody, where everybody feels at home, at peace, that they have a place and that their place in our society is protected by my leadership of this country.
Question number 4, Michelle Thompson.
To ask the First Minister what support the Scottish Government is providing to women in enterprise.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government is committed to implementation of the Pathways report, which looked at how best to support women in entrepreneurship can be delivered and address the barriers that they continue to face. We've allocated £1.5 million this year to support this work, building on the £1.3 million invested through the pre-startup fund last year.
Michelle Thompson.
I thank the First Minister for his response, and I recognise the efforts made with the 2023 Pathways report and hope that any funding can continue on a sustainable basis. Figures from FSB in 2018 suggested women-led businesses account for nearly £9 billion gross value add. Today's figure, of course, is likely to be much higher. Yet a recent report from Women's Enterprise Scotland articulates continued systemic barriers, citing issues such as an increase in discrimination and unequal treatment of women in business. Will the First Minister and his new Cabinet commit to a focus on the value of women-led businesses as a key part of his stated aim of driving economic growth and as a means of increasing labour market participation, innovation and productivity?
First Minister.
President Officer, could I welcome the contribution to this discussion that Michelle Thompson makes, particularly in her question today, but also through her convenership of the cross-party group on women and enterprise. And can I say that I acknowledge that and recognise that our efforts to boost economic growth in Scotland would be greatly enhanced if the participation of women in enterprise was at an equal level to the participation of men in our society. So our efforts have got to be focused on closing that gap to ensure that women are able to make a greater contribution to enterprise. So I welcome the points that she has made today, and I commit the Government in its economic strategy and the work that we're taking forward to specifically make sure that we close that gap and to work with women and organisations like Women's Enterprise Scotland, who are a fabulous organisation, to achieve those objectives.
Question number 5, Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on the Scottish Government's progress towards its target to increase the number of residential rehabilitation beds in Scotland to 650 by 2026.
First Minister.
President Officer, we committed over £38 million for the development of new and expanded facilities at 8 residential rehab projects across the country. Investment in these capacity projects alone will provide an increase of at least 140 beds by 25-26, boosting the rehab capacity in Scotland from 425 to 565, up over 30%. 3 of these in Edinburgh, Dundee and Ayrshire are fully completed and operational. Alongside this direct funding, we are confident that our significant wider investment in the sector will contribute to boosted bed numbers and expect to meet our target of a 50% increase to residential rehab capacity by at least 650 by 2026. We intend to commission a formal audit of residential rehab bed capacity in 2025 to provide an authoritative account of our progress towards this target.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the First Minister for his update? And of course, I think all our thoughts are with anyone who's experienced the loss of a loved one due to drugs. And I hear what the First Minister is saying, but the rhetoric and the reality on the ground are two very different things. Of the £38 million that has been allocated, the last Public Health Scotland audit into rehab beds showed that that produced only an additional 32 beds of capacity. It's nowhere near the levels that it needs to be. And I think there are many substantial barriers to accessing rehab that still remain, and the audit report shows that. Now, last week I had the great privilege of visiting one such centre called The Haven in Kilmacombe, who provides residential rehab care. Now, they told me directly that they have the ability to increase their capacity by 18 beds in a very, very short space of time, but have faced substantial problems in accessing government money. Endless bureaucracy and red tape are holding them back. And that story is repeated right across the country, First Minister. The money is supposedly there, but the bed capacity simply is not. And that's the reality on the ground. Scotland's drug death crisis, I think, truly is our crisis, and it's our national shame. People are dying, First Minister. The strategy is not working, I'm afraid. So in this newfound spirit of being honest with each other as politicians, will the First Minister be honest? The strategy is not working, the drug death numbers are rising, and will he personally commit to making this his #1 priority?
First Minister.
First of all, let me associate myself directly with the comments that Mr Green has made about the tragedy of drug deaths and the loss for families that are affected by the effect of drugs. And it is a national problem that we have to address, and I give him that solemn commitment that we will do that. I've set out my response to Mr Green's question, but I hear what he's saying about the concerns from the Haven project that he visited in Kilmacombe. I want to understand directly what those barriers are, because I have no interest in announcements being made and the practical reality not being felt within communities. So if Mr Green would be so good as to advise me of the details of that. Christina McKelvey has been reappointed last night to continue the leadership of drugs and alcohol policy within the government, and I'll ask Ms McKelvey to engage with Mr Green, but obviously I remain open to discussions very directly about how we progress on this national tragedy, and give Mr Green the assurance of the seriousness with which I attach to the issues that he's raised with me today.
Paul Swinney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I welcome the First Minister to his place. The Safer Consumption pilot is due to launch in Glasgow by early autumn. And across the Chamber, I think there's widespread support for these facilities as just one of many tools required to prevent drug deaths in our communities. But can the First Minister confirm that there will be clear referral pathways to residential rehab for those presenting at the overdose prevention facilities who request or need that support? Because it's just one of many ways in which we can prevent people falling into the trap of addiction and, of course, death. It's essential because I've seen it happen elsewhere in the world, such as in Copenhagen, where it works very effectively. Within 5 minutes, a referral to residential rehab can happen from their overdose prevention facilities. Will the First Minister offer a similar guarantee?
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Swinney for his kind remarks, and again I very much welcome the points that he's put to me. There should be a referral pathway in place at this moment. So the scenario Mr Swinney puts to me of once the safer consumption room proposition is implemented, there should be a pathway available. But I take very seriously the point that he makes, that there should be a pathway, because we can only help people on the road to recovery if that pathway is available as swiftly as Mr Swinney puts it to me today. So that is my expectation, but of course as I become closer to many of these particular issues, I will have in mind the issue that Mr Swinney has raised with me.
Question number 6, Pauline McNeill.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service continue to prosecute postmasters when there was evidence that the Horizon computer system used by the Post Office was flawed. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, as Parliament will be well aware, and as the Lord President reminded me when I took the oath of office yesterday, the Lord Advocate and the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service are rightly independent from government in their responsibility for the prosecution of crime. I am advised that it was not until the decisions by the courts in England and Wales in 2019 and 2021 that the full extent of the issues with Horizon emerged. Until that point, the Post Office maintained that the system was reliable. Indeed, the Post Office told Scottish prosecutors in 2013 that its external lawyers had reviewed all potentially impacted Scottish cases and found no issues. In 2015, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service was not provided with further evidence which had been promised by the Post Office to demonstrate that Horizon was as robust as they suggested. Therefore, the decision was taken to no longer rely on Horizon until such time as that further evidence was provided. As we all know, the Post Office have at best obfuscated and at worst hidden the issues with Horizon. It is only through the ongoing public inquiry that we are learning to what extent that was undertaken.
Pauline McNeill.
I also welcome the First Minister to his post. I would ask the First Minister to note carefully what I'm going to say here. We know that in 2013, Post Office lawyers came to Scotland to meet with senior procurator fiscals to convince them to keep prosecuting cases. But forensic accountant's second sight interim report was given to Crown Office and flagged up that there were defects or bugs in the Horizon software, giving rise to 76 branches being affected by incorrect balances or transactions. But in an email to me this week, the second sight director, Ron Warmington, said if there'd been a little less naivety from the Crown Office, it would have been beneficial. And if the Crown Office had at least taken the precaution of checking this report and calling him or the second sight offices, the outcome might well have been different. So does the First Minister agree that notwithstanding the independence of the Crown Office, but they should be fully accountable for the miscarriages of justice in Scotland because they didn't provide the checks and balances that they should have? They chose to continue to prosecute cases in 5 years, never wrote to a single victim or attempted to overturn any of those convictions until now. Given this, shouldn't the Lord Advocate come here to this Parliament and answer further questions?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, first of all, let me welcome the remarks of Polly McNeill and her welcome, which is appreciated. On the issue of, we're getting, Polly McNeill, from her long service in the Justice Committees of this Parliament, will understand that we are getting in this question into territory where I will be intruding on, if I answer it in great deal of detail, on the independence of the Lord Advocate, and I will not do that. The Lord Advocate is an independent office holder, and I want to ensure that I protect the independence of the Lord Advocate by my actions. So the issues that Polly McNeill raises are material to Crown Office decisions about the prosecutions that have been taken. I will relay to the Lord Advocate the points that have been made by Polly McNeill today. I met with the Lord Advocate last night to confirm my desire for her to continue as the Lord Advocate, but I will convey to her the points that Polly McNeill has made, and of course we will continue to engage with other parties in Parliament about the appropriate way in which this issue can be addressed within Parliament.
Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We know the UK-wide use of the tainted Horizon computer system evidence was a decision of the Post Office. So does the First Minister now share my concerns that it appears clear that people at the top of the Post Office have continually obfuscated and provided misleading information over the years?
First Minister.
Officer, there's obviously an ongoing public inquiry that's looking at the issues that are material to Audrey Nicholl's question, and I'm struck by, in observing that evidence, how overwhelming it looks that the point Audrey Nicholl makes is a fair point. I think we've got to allow that public inquiry to take its course, but while that is happening, there is action we can take to remedy the issue of miscarriages of justice, and that is of course part of the legislative programme of the Government, and the Government will bring those proposals to Parliament.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Conservatives have tried to get the Lord Advocate in here 3 times to answer Pauline McNeill's questions and many other questions, because Scotland's post office victims deserve those answers. Yet the SNP and the Greens voted against this reasonable request. So I ask again, why won't John Swinney do the right thing, and why is he adding to the distress and delays of the Horizon victims?
First Minister.
Again, Mr Finlay, as an experienced member of the Criminal Justice Committee and also and as somebody who knows his way around the issues in our courts and judicial system, that the Lord Advocate is independent in the prosecutorial decisions that are taken. I've said to Parliament that I will convey to the Lord Advocate the issues...
Let us hear the First Minister. Let's hear the First Minister.
I will convey to the Lord Advocate the issues that have been raised with me by Polly McNeill and by Russell Finlay, and we will, of course, as I said in my answer to Polly McNeill, continue to cooperate with other political parties about the best way to address these issues.
Question number 7, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that Scotland has the highest suicide rate in the United Kingdom, with young men being 3 times more likely to die than women.
First Minister.
Suicide prevention is a key priority for the Scottish Government, and as First Minister it will be a priority for me. Together with the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, we published our 10-year suicide prevention strategy, Creating Hope Together, and an associated first 3-year action plan in September of 2022. This is backed by a commitment to double suicide prevention annual funding to £2.8 million by 2026. We are tailoring our approach to ensure we reach people most at risk of suicide across Scotland. This includes a strong emphasis on men.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Last week in Parliament, the Suicide Prevention Witnesses panel included representatives from Scotland's Men's Shed Association. They are seen as possibly the most effective prevention and life-affirming movement and inspirational in improving men's health. The association will be expected to pursue alternative funding arrangements from out with the Scottish Government going forward. Therefore, can I ask, why once again have the Scottish Government decided that their funding is not seen as a priority when it is saving lives?
First Minister.
If Mr Stewart will allow me, I'll look into the question that he's raised with me about funding for the Men's Shed movement. I've had many associations, many happy associations with the Men's Shed movement. Indeed, I had the great pleasure of opening the Men's Shed in the village of Stanley, in my constituency, which was emerged out of a collaboration with Historic Environment Scotland, which was an example of how government facilities can be used to create a men's shed and support it without direct funding being made available. And obviously, as I answered Mr Ross earlier, funding is under enormous pressure. But I recognise the contribution of the men's shed movement. I also recognise that my colleague Jim Fairley just last week had a gathering in Parliament of a variety of different organisations supporting men who face difficulty, and I really welcome all of the efforts that are going on to support that effort.
Rhoda Grant.
When considering population size, the Highlands and Islands has consistently had a higher rate of suicide compared to other regions. Mental health provision in NHS Highland has been variable over recent years, with NHS Highland spending over £2 million last year alone on locum psychiatrists. Staff shortages are leaving charities such as No More Lost Souls, Mickey's Line and the James Support Group to fill the gaps. Can I ask the First Minister whether he'll consider a different approach to recruitment of health staff in rural areas, such as financial incentives for permanent staff to relocate? We simply can't continue without the support we need for vulnerable people.
First Minister.
I recognise the seriousness of the issue that Rhoda Grant raises, and it applies not just in this area of policy that we're talking about. It applies in a variety of different areas. The Education Secretary will be wrestling with these problems in relation to teacher recruitment as well. So there is a substantive issue that needs to be explored here to see if there is a way in which we can try to do it. Some of the teacher induction schemes actually do that already. So there is a serious point to be applied there. I would want to say that there is much good provision in the Highlands which is provided by some of the organisations like Shinty Clubs, for example, where there is a very good outreach work done to try to support men who face difficulty, and I very much welcome that as part of the approach that we need to take.
Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, given that the first few days after a person is discharged from a psychiatric ward, they are at their most vulnerable to suicide, but I understand there is a requirement they are visited within 72 hours of discharge by a mental health nurse. Now, this is very difficult if discharge is on a Friday with the Monday deadline to deliver this, especially in rural areas such as my constituency, with long distances to be covered. Can I ask the First Minister to advise if there is any flexibility in such circumstances to be practicable and to comply with that requirement, such as an online contact initially, but just initially?
First Minister.
I think the way I'd like to answer the question from Christine Graham is to say that although the 72-hour commitment is what we're working to achieve it within, we should get that contact there as quickly as possible. So we shouldn't view the 72-hour commitment as simply the measure of what we're trying to do. We should be trying to work to get that commitment there swiftly. I think that there are opportunities for a telephone call or a video call to individuals as a flexible alternative. But I would stress the importance of making sure that support is in place at the earliest possible opportunity.
Move to constituency and general supplementaries. I call Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, it's with considerable sorrow that I must report that another person has lost her life on the A9, and I'm sure all our thoughts are with her family now. In this Parliament, 5 out of the 6 political parties represented, and no less than 122 out of 129 MSPs all support the dualling of the A9. And prior to this question, of which notice has been given to the First Minister, I secured agreement from one member of each of the 5 parties, including myself, to ask this question of the First Minister. I very much welcome his appointment and his approach to work cross-party. Will he therefore meet with the 5 of us to discuss how we can accelerate the completion of this dualling project and thereby prevent the risks of further fatalities arising?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, firstly, let me express my sadness at the most recent fatality that has taken place on the A9 and express my condolences to the family of the individual involved. As Mr Ewing will know from our long association, I have been committed to the dualling of the A9 from the very origins of my first parliamentary campaign for the 1992 election in the North Tayside constituency, where the A9 passes through my local area. Therefore, I have been pleased that this government has delivered a number of sections of improvement of the A9, the Craig to Dalradi section that was put in place, the improvements at with the grade separated junction at the Ballinlough junction, the Crubin Moor improvements, and also the most recent Luncarty to Burnham improvements that has been made into dual carriageway. And obviously the Moy to Tomatin section is currently in the procurement process, and we hope that is concluded shortly. So I want to assure Mr Ewing of the government's commitment to dualling the A9. I'd be very happy to meet the cross-party delegation to discuss this issue and to explain how this project fits into the infrastructure programme of the Scottish Government, and also to explain how the different steps we have taken within the capital investment of the programme have delivered the improvements to the A9 that the Government has already delivered.
And Douglas Lumsden.
Presiding Officer, the extremist Greens have been ditched from government, so can the First Minister tell me if the damaging policy of presumption against new oil and gas will also be ditched?
First Minister.
I don't think Mr Lumsden's language is appropriate in Parliament. Now, it's not for me to police that. I'm just giving my observation about that. That's a matter for the presiding officer. But I think in the spirit of trying to get us to a position where we all respect each other's opinion, I disagree with Mr Lumsden fundamentally on more issues than I care to imagine. But he will be treated with courtesy by me. And I think others should be treated with courtesy in this chamber as well. So the government, and please, Presiding Officer, allow me to say that I was not making any, I was not intruding on your responsibilities either, but I just generally think the public expect us to be quite civilised to each other, and it would be nice if we could be. On the question, the substantive point of the question, I want to make sure that we have a just transition for the oil and gas sector. We have a climate crisis with us. We have to take careful and appropriate steps to respond to that climate crisis, and that must involve a just transition for the oil and gas sector, and that's what the government will deliver.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. Point of order, Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer. I seek your clarification on Rule 13.2 regarding ministerial statements, because in recent days we've heard requests, both in questions today, FMQs, but also attempts to change the order of business from the Conservatives. Under Rule 13.2, it's my understanding that any minister or member of the government, including the law officers, can make a statement if they make a request to you to do so. Can you clarify that if the law officers were wishing to make a statement, that it is open to them to make such a request to you directly?
I can confirm, Mr Johnson, that any member of the government can make such a request. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Colette Stevenson, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and public gallery to do so.
Okay, if I could ask those leaving the public gallery to do so as quickly and as quietly as possible as we proceed with the next item of business, which is a members' business debate on motion 12342 in the name of Colette Stevenson on shining a light on domestic abuse in LGBT+ History Month. I'd invite members. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put, but I would encourage members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons, and I invite Colette Stevenson to open the debate around 7 minutes. Ms Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm grateful to members for supporting my motion. The catalyst for this debate was a recent stakeholder roundtable we had in Parliament led by Dr Stephen Maxwell from the University of Glasgow on domestic abuse in the LGBTQ+ community. Bringing together MSPs, Dr Maxwell and representatives from councils, police and third sector, this event allowed us to have an open conversation about the many challenges LGBTQ+ people experience, not only the harm of domestic abuse, but the barriers in accessing support. This was followed with a report which has 14 recommendations, and I will try to cover as much of these as I can in the time that I have. Domestic abuse is an abhorrent crime, and we all recognise the harm it causes to individuals and to our society. There have been some big developments in recent years in terms of tackling the damage of domestic abuse, including the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2018, which brought together within one offence the modern understanding of what domestic abuse looks like, including psychological domestic abuse, such as coercive and controlling behaviour. The Scottish Government also developed the Equally Safe strategy to prevent and eradicate violence against women and girls. This sets out a vision of prevention, improving support services and strengthening the justice response for victims and perpetrators. These developments are very welcome. However, at the round table, we heard about the issues when it comes to gender framing of policies, and many people in the community don't fit into societal assumptions on masculinity or femininity, or into traditional binary gender norms. So there is a need to ensure that policy and practice works to ensure anyone experiencing domestic abuse can get the support that they need. The roundtable participants agreed that there needs to be a national LGBTQ+ domestic abuse action plan, and perhaps based on or aligned with Equally Safe, and I hope the Government will consider this. Presiding Officer, underpinning the issues and the invisibility of domestic abuse faced by the community is data collection. There are challenges in understanding the extent of such crimes, and for example, the Crown Office publishes a breakdown of the sex of the accused in domestic abuse charges, but not the sex of the victim. And Police Scotland sometimes includes the sex of both the suspect and the victim in its statistics. We know that most cases of domestic abuse don't get reported, and I would encourage any victim to seek support from organisations who can help them. And there are many great services out there. Looking at Police Scotland data from 2022 to 23, where gender was recorded, around 3% of recorded domestic abuse incidents involved same-sex victims and suspects. This equates to around 1,500 incidents. There is no breakdown of these figures for transgender people. However, research suggests that between 30 to 45% of LGBTQ+ people will experience intimate partner violence, and this is in line with levels experienced by women in heterosexual relationships. I hope the Government can work alongside its partners in the justice sector to consider what approaches can be taken to better understand the scale of LGBTQ+ domestic abuse, and perhaps initially to get official estimates of the prevalence of this. One of the challenges for LGBTQ+ people who are experiencing domestic abuse is a nervousness about engaging with statutory services. And it was interesting to hear police officers at the round table acknowledging the concerns that many LGBTQ+ people have, while being clear on a commitment to ensuring Scotland's police force resembles and acts for the diverse communities that make up modern Scotland. However, the changes that have to be made go well beyond the police. And a key part of policies like Equally Safe is to prevent domestic abuse from occurring in the first place. So there is a need to ensure that public sector bodies and indeed wider society is ready and able to prevent domestic abuse within the community. This could include developing an LGBTQ+ curriculum within existing sexual violence and domestic abuse courses, including those provided by statutory services. There is also a specific need for risk assessments to be more inclusive of LGBTQ+ experiences. For example, multi-agency risk assessment conferences, or MARACs, are used across Scotland to help identify high-risk cases. But concerns were raised at the round table that processes like this are structured around heterosexual norms. In fact, stakeholders mentioned that the prevalence of LGBTQ+ people being referred to support agencies through a MARAC was well below the expected number, which likely indicates an issue with the current safeguarding policies. So overall, there appears to be a significant underestimate of the prevalence of domestic abuse within the community. And in turn, this has perhaps meant that local services can't recognise and address the issue. This is not a criticism of services, but an example of why there has to be a shift in the approach to tackling domestic abuse. There is a lot to say on this topic, Presiding Officer, but I want to conclude by thanking Dr Maxwell and his colleagues for their work to highlight this issue, as well as to the people who have taken part in research studies on LGBTQ+ domestic abuse. And I also want to thank everyone who took part in the roundtable earlier this year. I hope today's debate will shine a light on domestic abuse, encourage people to seek the support they deserve, and help begin the change we need to see for people in the community who experience domestic abuse, something which has for too long been hidden. I hope to meet with ministers soon to discuss the recommendations, and that the Scottish Government can help advance these, particularly around identifying gaps in service provision, ensuring agencies are equipped to deal with the specific challenges for the community, and helping ensure there is adequate data collection. We are all agreed in here that domestic abuse has no place in modern Scotland, and we must do everything we can to support anyone who experiences it.
Thank you, Ms Stevenson. We move to the open debate. I call first Emma Harper to be followed by Paula Kane. Around 4 minutes. Ms Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate and congratulate my friend and colleague Colette Stevenson on securing it. Colette has outlined this issue really well, and I am pleased to follow on from her at the beginning of LGBT+ History Month. I too want to start by condemning domestic abuse in all its forms, whether that be sexual assault, coercive control, psychological abuse or any other form of controlling behaviour. Presiding Officer, the University of Glasgow has carried out a great deal of work on LGBT domestic abuse, and the findings of the report do make for some concerning reading. The research shows that LGBT+ people face the fear of being stigmatised and disbelieved by the police. Support services being designed for heterosexual people is also an issue, and a systemic lack of LGBT+ domestic abuse knowledge and inclusion across most services in Scotland. For the few inclusive services, the report recorded prolonged waiting lists and an inadequate safe accommodation for LGBT+ people, a problem which the report's author, Dr Stephen Maxwell, has warned will only be worsened by impending local authority cuts. Dr Maxwell said, and I quote, "Domestic abuse experiences of LGBTQ+ victims and survivors are overlooked and unheard. 1 in 3 LGBTQ+ adults will experience domestic abuse in their lifetime, the same level as heterosexual women. And we know that this abuse does indeed have a profound impact on a person's life. So it's absolutely crucial that the Scottish Government does all it can to get the services right for our LGBT+ community. We must deliver parity of esteem for domestic abuse services for all victims of domestic abuse of any and all sexual orientations. Presiding Officer, there is a clear way forward to improve the current situation. According to Dr Maxwell, there are a number of steps that could reduce the high-risk situations that LGBT+ victims experience. The starting point is for the Scottish Government to review the national policy Equally Safe, which Colette Stevenson has mentioned. The national policy Equally Safe is where LGBT+ and domestic abuse experiences could be included, and that's another quote from the University of Glasgow. They say that the LGBT people's experiences are invisible in Equally Safe strategy. The report is calling for a tailored national action plan to provide visible, competent measures to meet people's needs. This includes stronger prevention, service inclusion messages, more inclusive safe spaces and practitioner workforce education, including through, for example, TURAS e-learning modules for health and social care staff. Previously, as a clinical nurse educator, I developed and delivered e-learning courses, and it seems pretty achievable to me that this is something that we could pursue. So I would ask the Minister if this could be considered. Presiding Officer, as Colette Stevenson's motion shows, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service statistical publications show that 30,139 charges were reported to the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service with domestic abuse identifier in 2022-2023. In these cases, the accused was male in 86% of reports. But that means that 4,219 women were the perpetrators of domestic abuse. We do need to ensure that policies such as Equally Safe are working to support anyone who has experienced domestic abuse, and it is not all just a women-only problem. One excellent example of work being undertaken to support the LGBT+ people who had experienced domestic abuse is the charity Gallop. Gallop specialise in supporting victims and survivors of domestic abuse, sexual violence, hate crime, honour-based abuse, forced marriage, conversion therapies and other types of interpersonal abuse. Gallop is run by the LGBT+ people for LGBT+ people, and this needs it needs the community. The community are basically at the heart of everything that Gallop does. It is a fantastic organisation, and I would like to hear from the Minister whether the Scottish Government could engage with this organisation. I am just closing. Enabling our LGBT+ community to be supported in cases of domestic abuse and violence is crucial, and I welcome this debate. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Harper. And I call Paul O'Kane to be followed by Marie McNair. Around 4 minutes. Mr O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I thank Colette Stevenson for securing this debate today and taking time in this place to highlight the problems of domestic abuse, intimate partner violence and indeed the challenges faced by members of the LGBT+ community is vitally important. And these issues demand constant attention and focus to ensure that we continue to progress in the right direction, making clear that there is no place for domestic abuse in Scotland and furthering indeed the rights and equality of LGBT+ people. The motion before us references the view that structural inequalities could be prohibiting LGBT+ victims of domestic abuse from coming forward or receiving the support that they need. And I want to start by addressing those structural inequalities, because there is no doubt in my mind that of late the rhetoric in relation to LGBT+ people has become more toxic. We, of course, have come a long way since the days of Section 28 and the homophobia of years gone by. But there can be no mistaking that, and we should not kid ourselves, that homophobia and transphobia are still present in our politics, our media and our society. And indeed, some of the headlines in the press over the past few weeks and some of the reactions and the commentary on them have crossed the line, I think, from nuanced, responsible and sensitive questioning of policy into full-throated stereotypical attacks, which are met with hurt and very often fear by LGBT+ people across Scotland. And I think it is those feelings of hurt and fear that very often convince people that they won't be heard or taken seriously, that indeed they are still looked on as other. So I think when we talk about domestic abuse and intimate partner violence, both within and out with the LGBT+ community, but we still can't talk in a sensible way about inclusive education and support that treats LGBT+ identities as normal and valid, is it any wonder that we are concerned about underreporting of the problems that people face? And I think we've heard some of this already, but I think it is why education is so important. Education around domestic abuse and indeed what it means to be LGBT+ in Scotland. I think that remains completely vital, and it's why I, and I know many others across the Chamber, continue to support organisations like the TIE campaign so we can increase understanding and support to young people. Because there are still too many young LGBT+ people in Scotland who are scared to talk about themselves, their identity and their experiences, because they don't see themselves reflected in their education and in society. And beyond tackling that general stigma that is faced by LGBT+ people, and helping them empower them to speak out, we know that all of this needs to go hand in hand with tackling stigma and fear there is generally about domestic abuse and intimate partner violence. And I do recognise we've made significant progress in the way that we talk about domestic abuse in the context of violence against women and girls. There is, of course, much more to do, and I stand with the work that the Government is doing and the excellent work of organisations such as White Ribbon Scotland, particularly in terms of ensuring that men take responsibility for changing our attitudes and behaviours. Deputy Presiding Officer, we are debating this motion at the beginning of the government of a new First Minister and Deputy First Minister. And indeed, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Emma Roddick, who I see is in the Chamber, for all of her work in her time as Minister for Equalities, Migration and Refugees, particularly in these areas which I know she took a keen interest in. And I wish her well on the backbenches, where I know she will continue to advocate on all of these issues. And can I say to the Government, we must now not roll back on the hard-fought rights of LGBT+ people, but rather this Government must show commitment and progress whilst building a consensus across our country, just as we have done at every milestone for LGBT+ people in the past. And as I have said in this Chamber before, We aren't going back into the closet, and we aren't going to hide, and we aren't going to be ashamed of who we are. So I do support the calls in the motion for a national LGBT+ domestic abuse strategy to raise awareness and improve services so they are accessible to everyone in that community. And I call on the Government in responding to reflect on that. I think we must start the journey on tackling this important issue today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr O'Kane. I now call Marie McNair to be followed by Jamie Green. Around 4 minutes. Ms McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank my colleague Colette Stevenson for bringing this important debate to the Chamber to help us highlight the issue of domestic abuse in LGBTQ+ relationships. Domestic abuse knows no boundaries and it follows no rules. It can happen to anyone, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. It can take many forms, be that emotional, psychological, physical or sexual abuse. In 2022-23, it was reported that 30,139 charges were reported to the Crown Office and the Procurator Fiscal Service with a domestic abuse identifier, and the accused was male in 86% of these cases. However, it is noted by Police Scotland that 1,691 domestic abuse incidents were recorded with same-sex victims and suspected perpetrators in 21-22. These figures are concerning, but highlight the possibility that LGBTQ+ domestic abuse may go widely unreported. Societal discrimination, stigma or inequalities may be prohibiting LGBTQ+ victims of domestic abuse from coming forward to receive the support they so greatly deserve. This is backed up by research which notes that underreporting is common due to not feeling safe or able to identify their experiences of abuse within typical assumptions of heterosexual dominance. Research also suggests that rates of underreporting within LGBTQ+ population are between 60 to 80%, which is consistent with the national underreporting rate of 79%, according to the Office of National Statistics in 2018. We cannot allow fear and stigma to prevent survivors from seeking help and support. So it's important that we do more to include LGBTQ+ survivors within our discussions and actions on domestic abuse. Some studies suggest around 40% of individuals in LGBTQ+ relationships may experience domestic abuse. And it's also been noted that higher rates of domestic abuse are found amongst those identifying as transgender. And according to the Scottish Trans Alliance, 80% of transgender victims in their study had experienced domestic abuse. And this has been backed up by recent literature finding that transgender individuals are 2 times more likely to experience physical abuse and nearly 3 times more likely to experience sexual abuse than cisgender individuals. And experiencing this alongside transphobia can lead to severe and concerning mental health issues. So in tackling domestic abuse, we must also address the root causes of misogyny, homophobia and toxic masculinity. We must challenge harmful stereotypes and attitudes that result in discrimination towards LGBTQ people. We must also educate each other on the warning signs of domestic abuse to help break the cycle of violence. Relationships must be built upon mutual respect and compassion. No one should ever be fearful of violence or coercive control within the relationship. And when we reflect on the achievements and struggles of the LGBT community throughout history, I'd like to remember all those victims of domestic abuse. To those who have felt their lives shattered around them, to those who have felt invisible, you're not alone. In fact, I experienced it too, and I'm here to show that we won't be silenced. And I do so in recognition that it's important to speak out and empower others to do so, to recognise the signs of when you're being gaslighted, bullied and manipulated, and that you're strong, resilient and have the strength and support to stand up to bullies and speak out. To assert that this type of behaviour is wrong and not welcome in any part of this society. I'm here on your side because I've been there, and can I thank my colleague Colette Stevenson again for bringing this really important debate to the Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McNair. I now call Jamie Green to be followed by Emma Roddick. Around 4 minutes. Mr Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I first of all pay tribute to Colette Stevenson and her relentless work on this issue, and for bringing stakeholders to this Parliament earlier this year. I'd like to congratulate her on the longest motion I've ever read in the Parliament. It read more like a report, which is excellent, and testament to her office as well. But contained in that report is a lot to get through, and I'm going to cover 3 very specific areas of the motion that I think we should debate. I also would like to put on record my thanks and tribute to those who did a lot of the groundwork and research into the subject, particularly Dr Stephen Maxwell of the University of Glasgow, who has been relentless in keeping MSPs up to date on his work, and of course for informing the stakeholder roundtable that we had in February, which I attended and was grateful for. But I also would like to thank those in the third sector. It was mentioned already, Emma Harper mentioned Gallup, who organise a domestic abuse helpline, the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, which specifically helps LGBT people. But also, I think, one of the most profound things I heard at that roundtable was the lived experience of many of the young people who attended, and some of the very moving and very difficult stories that they shared with us. It's never easy when we attend these groups to listen to what is actually happening out there in the real world, when we're so often caught up in statistics and policy documents. But why is all this important? Because, well, I think it goes without saying that domestic abuse is abhorrent and unacceptable to all of us. I think that's become something that all parties have signed up to over the last couple of years. The legislation that we've passed through DASA and other pieces of legislation, the debate we had last week, was another good example of cross-party working on how we as a Parliament use the powers available to us to tackle this abhorrent practice. But particularly the experience of LGBT plus people is quite a unique one, because for all the reasons we've just heard, they often feel that inability to report. They feel the stigma that comes with it, not just the stigma of being in an LGBT relationship, which is often difficult depending on the community they live in, but then to have to admit that they are suffering some form of abuse or coercive behaviour and physical and mental violence. Of course, the Equally Safe strategy is a good framework, because what it did is it unpicked how we can take a government policy and design it around particular groups of people and meet the needs of those. And one of the things that came out from the report from Dr Maxwell was that was actually a welcome analysis of how different routes and pathways by which services can be delivered to people is so important, but equally the awareness of access to those services is important too. The point I wanted to make is an important one, and that's that we need LGBT plus specific services. And the reason for that is because most people within the community who've been surveyed felt invisible, and that's the language they used, invisible in these services. There was a huge reluctance of reporting to the police. I think the Police Scotland attendees at that roundtable acknowledged that. Now, there has been a lot of work done on training for frontline officers on how they deal with DASA and how they deal with situations that they respond to. But what happens when they turn up and they're faced with a domestic situation, which is an LGBT household? Are they fully confident that they know how to deal with that and gather the appropriate evidence that may be used by the Crown down the line? And I'm not convinced, and nor was the Roundtable convinced by that. And the final point I wanted to make was that barrier to services and awareness. Now, a lot's been said over the last few weeks about organisations like LGBT Youth Scotland and the TIE campaign and other organisations who help and educate young people. Education is absolutely key. The earlier we educate people about appropriate relationships and what constitutes abuse, the better, in my view. And there's nothing controversial to say about that. And finally, I'd like to put on record my own personal thanks to Emma Roddick for the work that she's done in government. I know many people have been gloating over her exit. I think that's disgraceful. I think everyone who gets into public office deserves the respect and thanks for doing so. And I'd like to thank Colette Stevenson for bringing this really important matter to the Chamber, and I hope it's something we can revisit in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Green. I now call Emma Roddick to be followed by Maggie Chapman. Around 4 minutes. Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I want to first thank Colette Stevenson for bringing this important debate forward. I know that she's taken a special interest in this issue, and her allyship is so incredibly valuable, and I'm sure it's appreciated by many of her constituents as well as the wider community. And I've felt throughout this debate the weight and the value of the contributions from Marie McNair, from Paul O'Kane, Jamie Green, Emma Harper, and particularly right now when LGBTQ+ rights are under sustained and constant attack. Attack which Paul O'Kane described very articulately, and I'm grateful to him and to Jamie Green for their kind comments. And I will say, while you expect comments of support in times like this from your closest allies, I've been so appreciative of the comments from many colleagues on particularly the Labour and Green benches, but also the Conservatives as well. I've always tried to build relationships cross-party, and I have massive respect for many MSPs across this chamber, and it's been lovely to feel some reciprocation of that today. And it's perhaps most important right now when we are considering equalities issues, be it for the LGBTQ+ community, disabled people, refugees and people seeking asylum, people who